So in the spirit of this workshop being interpretable machine learning, neuroscience, misspoke. I wanted to talk a little bit about the series of methods and analysis that we have done trying to fit neural data into interpretable dynamical systems. I'm going to focus on expressive power, evaluation of these models, and possibly validations, if I have enough time. So if we have a complex system like this thing here, human engineered, if you're trying to reverse engineer this, it's going to be very difficult, right? It's a very complex system, but a lot of things are helping you if you're trying to understand this particular system, because it has a very neat decomposition. It has pieces that are, modules that you can see, and most helpful of all is that it comes with a manual. So somebody has taken care of designing the system, and then they have a readable manual, hopefully readable manual, to help you understand at the level that you need to operate the system. And in neuroscience, we also have inherently interpretable computational neuroscience models, and many of them can be found at Cosyne. I would say high density of these models exist here. And one kind of model is this, what I would call theorist model, or a top-down model, where you have hand-designed systems that are low complexity. They're built with well-understood modules, maybe a small spiky neural net modules, and it comes with a manual in the form of paper or a preprint or abstract, but sometimes with lectures. Very, very helpful in understanding. And they're often very beautiful, either mathematically or in terms of their structures. They have a lot of meaning. Often they're derived from a normative principle, like maximizing information, for example. It's going to be very beautiful and optimal in many senses. And then there's the other kind of models, slightly less interpretable in my opinion, which rely on deep neural nets or recurrent neural nets. These have been very, very popular in the past 5 years or so. And these are more complex. They have lots and lots of parameters. Also built with very well understood components. And it comes with instructions on how to train them. But it does not come with an instruction as to how to interpret once the model is trained. It's hard to open the boxes. I mean, there's many approaches to do so, and many people have been successful, but in general, these are very difficult to do. And often, the behavior of these models could be counterintuitive, and because it's high-dimensional space in many cases, also it's optimal in its own way, in the way that it's optimized for. All right, so my approach, and many others in this room, slightly different in the sense that we're more data-driven in terms of our analysis. So let's consider a simple cognitive computation. That's an animal doing a behavioral task where you have stimulation and some behavior, and there's an underlying high-dimensional biological neural network that's doing the task, but we don't have access to it. But we want to understand it. And in reality, we only have access to a small number of neurons that are subsampled from the system, say hundreds of neurons or so. And the approach that I'm taking here is to forget about the biological neural network, because we don't have much access to it, and try to, just using the data that we have, build a model of the abstract level, a cognitive level model, which is in the blue box there, that has a low-dimensional structure, very, very simple structure, and it's described as a dynamical system. And if we can describe the data that we have as generated from some low-dimensional dynamical system, perhaps we can gain insight into how the system is computing and performing these cognitive tasks. So let's get a little bit more concrete. This is a very simple example of a simple computation that happens over time, perceptual decision-making with vision. So we have visual motion to one direction or another, noisy evidence coming into your system. The task of the animal or the system is to integrate this information, S of t, over time, and say if it's going to the left or to the right, given a fixed interval. This is a trivial computation. If you have, MATLAB, you want to implement this, you write 2 lines of code, you'll do it, but it's unknown how the brain actually does it with, using hundreds of thousands or millions of neurons that's involved in doing this task. So there are many theories of how this could be implemented as a simple low-dimensional dynamical system. One pictured here is a continuous abstraction model where you have the blue dot over here is the neural state, and that flat plateau there is the continuous attractor. You're stable anywhere over there, and then if you fall down to one of these two decisions because of the evidence, you make your decision. But there are many other proposed models for this. You can have no region that's actually flat perfectly, 2-point attractors only. You could have more stable version of the continuous attractor where you have local wells where your small noise or small evidence will not push you away, but a big evidence will make you jump from one well to another to make more robust integration. And for the purposes of this talk, I'm not going to talk about any feed-forward or time delay style computation. Many of these computations could be computed that way, but in that case, it's going to be boring. So I'm only going to talk about the recurrent versions of these computations, where the dynamic system really shines. So this is a cartoon of the overall approach of these kind of methods. So you start with some data. This is the spike train on the left-hand side here, and then you can first do some dimensionality reduction, PCA, factor analysis, some fancier version of these things, and you can go to a low-dimensional space where each trajectory explains your data over time from trial to trial. A lot of people use these kind of latent variable models. We have heard from this morning from Manchi on this flavor of model. And from this intermediate representation of the neural trajectories, of the latent trajectories, it explains the data, and you can also interpret these things in terms of assigning meaning to different directions of the space. One direction means stimulus, the angle over here means head direction, and so on. But what we really want to do is to understand the implementation of the algorithm, how the animal is actually doing this computation, in which case we need to go one step further and really recover the dynamical system that's underlying the system, underlying these data. So that's where we really want to go, and if we can get there, we're going to interpret that face portrait there, where these arrows pointing are trying to give you the law that governs these trajectories that's evolving over space. Okay, so general framework of doing this is very, very long history of doing this. It's called state space modeling. And the simplest state space modeling that has been very, very powerful and successful was the Kalman filter. It's described by two equations. The first equation being the dynamical system that's latent. You don't observe this, x. In our case, it's going to be mostly 1D, 2D, or 3D, low-dimensional system of x. And then our observations are the neural data, perhaps 100-dimensional spike trains or whatnot. And in this case, these are linear Gaussian models. And the question is, if we fit this model, as many people do, the dynamical system that we get out of this, is just going to be a linear dynamic system. So what kind of theories can this really express? And for linear dynamical system models, or LDS, we know exactly what kind of dynamics are possible. Looks like it can do a lot of things, but actually it can only do one fixed point or a line of continuous fixed points, and just saddles, stables, spirals, and whatnot. But it cannot do anything non-trivial. And almost all neural computations that we are interested in are not linear dynamical system models. So what kind of features then are we interested in? We're interested in continuous attractors. Might be a line, might be a ring, might be a curve, might be a plane. We're interested in having multiple fixed points. Could be stable, saddle, or unstable. We're interested in bifurcations that are input-driven. Maybe the stimulus, if the stimulus is strong, some fixed points will go away. We're interested in nonlinear oscillations that are often found in neural data, and possibly chaos. Who knows? Maybe the brain is chaotic. So we're going to fit some time series models to the data, reconstruct the phase space, and try to interpret those things. There are tons of models that do these kind of nonlinear state space models. The Kalman filter on the top is not nonlinear, but these are all the extensions of that state space model that has been applied to specifically for neuroscience applications. Gaussian process fractal analysis is very, very popular. It's used everywhere. And then there are 3 columns here. The first column shows what kind of assumptions you make for the latent dynamical system, LDS. Several of these guys are LDS, so they're out in terms of finding out the cognitive computation. There are some that are in red. These are more powerful systems that can express much more rich set of dynamical systems. And I think we're going to hear more from several of these during this workshop. Well, I'm going to skip the details here because we're low on time. I'm going to quickly talk about the kinds of methods that we have developed in terms of in this context. So first of all, I want to tell you a little bit about the expressive power of dynamic systems that we have explored. The first one we have, this paper was a New York 2016 paper. It actually had Interpretable in the title. Now that I think about it, it might have not been the most appropriate title. But what we're showing here is that it could, this simple radial basis function network that can express the G over there, that describes the dynamical system, can capture all of the features that we just listed before. And in this case, it was where our main assumptions were that the dynamical system is locally smooth. It's if it has input U of t over there, that input is introduces perturbations through a locally linear approximation matrix B of B. That depends on the current state. And then we had an assumption that the phase space of this dynamical system is compact around the origin. So we had a term that explicitly said, if you're far away from the origin, just come back. We don't want you to run away. Let's try to estimate everything in terms of close to the origin. After this, we have explored many of other approaches. One of the things that we have explored was the GRU, gated recurrent units. These were very popular in neuroscience as well as in machine learning in terms of recurrent neural nets. So we tried to study if we could restrict the GRUs to be just two-dimensional and interpret it as a two-dimensional continuous dynamical system, what kind of dynamical systems can it express? And we found it can do, it has a bifurcation that can do nonlinear oscillations. You can have various geometry of fixed points and the topology, these different topological structures. But it cannot do line attractors, and it cannot do a ring attractor. So it's fine doing a limit cycle, so these are trying to train two-dimensional GRU to do a time series modeling. And basically, the form of the model is that the nonlinearity in it restricts you from having a line attractor or a ring attractor. So slightly restricted in some sense. And then what I'm really excited about is a system of a particular parameterization of dynamics that's actually piecewise linear and have multiscale in it. So to introduce this, I'm going to start by introducing the old model, the switching linear dynamical system model. Here, the latent dynamical system has multiple linear dynamical system models. So A of Z of t, where Z of t is some discrete variable, 1, 2, 3. You have multiple of these guys that switch between them depending on the discrete latent variable Z of t. And the Z of t is Markovian in this case, so it switches from one to another arbitrary times. If you fit this model to the data, it can nicely smooth things around. So in the top right corner over there, you can see there are 4 different locally linear dynamical systems, and it's smoothing the latent structure very well. But this is a terrible generative model, because if you try to simulate from this model, because of the Markovian nature of the discrete state, it'll switch at arbitrary times and generate things that don't look like your data at all. So Scott Linderman, who's sitting over there, has extended this to make it much more locally sensitive, called the recurrent switching linear dynamical system models. And what he did was to introduce a condition on where you are in the state space, the x of t, for the transition into the latent discrete state, z. So basically what happens is, in the state space, you have a hyperplane that splits your space, and if you're on one side, then the probability of transitioning to that blue state is high. And if you're not on that side, there's another hyperplane that says, if you're on that side, you're very likely to on the red dynamics. So you have, in this case, 5 dynamical systems that's roughly tiling the space. But one issue of this beautiful model is that this is not a universal way of discretizing your phase space into locally linear systems. you can easily see that the first hyperplane that is cut on the one side, it has to be the LDS, right? And you cannot have anything more complex on that side. So we extended this in collaboration with Scott to the tree-structured version of this, where we split the hyperplane, and both sides will split it again and again into pieces. So we basically have a binary tree that describes this, these splittings. And additionally, what we had was we can now use that splitting system to incorporate some, put some priors. So we're going to have these intermediate levels also have their own LDSs. So the root node will have an LDS that describes the dynamics as LDS on the full space, and this is going to be refined and refined as it goes down into the leaf nodes. The inference is sampling in this case, and I'll just show you the results pretty quickly. This was a two-dimensional oscillation. This is the Fitzhugh-Nagumo system. If you fit our model, you get basically three views. Right? You can see the LDS in the first view, root node, which is just one LDS. It has only one fixed point. It's pretty boring, and it looks nothing like the actual oscillation. If you use the second layer, you divide the space into two pieces, LDS and LDS. It sort of looks better. And if you have, if you go down to the leaf node, in this case the second level, it resembles very much the ground truth. And if you quantify this in terms of its prediction, it does very well. But I would like to point out our favorite quantification for this is actually this k-step prediction, because this model was actually in general, if you fit a dynamic system model for one-step prediction, for example, as Christina was talking about this morning, it may not do a very good job for predicting, far future, and that means it's not really capturing the key features of the dynamic system. So, in this case, we strongly advocate for these long-term forecasting as a evaluation method for these systems. The multi-scale nature of this really helps us give you a very interpretable description of systems. This is an example with the Lorentz system. So this is a chaotic system, and if you ask a human to describe this, they will say, oh, there's like two wings here, and for each wing you have some oscillation, and it looks like it's switching back and forth somewhat randomly. It's a chaotic system. And if you fit our model to this with two levels of a tree, the first level is boring. Again, it's only doing a single fixed point. These are three trajectories simulated from the model. The blue is the actual Lorentz behind here. If you go to the second level, it's going to describe the system as two LDSs. First of all, you can see that it's found that it squashes the space into these two-dimensional manifolds, and it switches back and forth. The blue state and the pink state there are both locally linear systems, but of course, Lorentz subtractor, it's not a perfect linear dynamic system, and it's faster on one side and slower on the other side, even within the same wing. So if you go one step deeper into this 4 LDSs, it splits each of these pink and blue one into halves, and you'll see that the blue one is split to green and yellow, which is fast and slow parts of it, and also the red one is split into 2. I'm going to show something. So this kind of multi-scale view will really allow you to see the whole dynamic system as, you're very familiar LDS, and then you'll zoom in and see parts of it being pieces of LDSs. Of course, this may or may not be the best way of viewing it in the real neural system. The real neural system probably not the Lorentz system. So I'm going to show you a quick example on a decision-making circuit. So this was Xiaojing Wang's winner-take-all model for perceptual decisions. There are 2,000 spiking neurons in this spiking neuron model, 2 excitatory populations corresponding to decisions, and 1 common inhibitory pool that might need to be updated according to Terry's new model. Yes?
One quick question. Are you learning these models based on data, or are you just seeing
The fits are all just based on the observations only. So these are unsupervised. Nothing is known. Just a time series. In this case, we're just given the spike trains, 150 spike trains at trials per trial, about 1,000 trials in this case. The fit are different from different methods. The one that I'm showing you right now is a sampling method. So it's a fully Bayesian sampling. So we will sample each of the latents in a sequence and update with the conditionals. It's not super fast in fitting, if that's what you're asking. I have faster versions I'm going to show you soon. So this is a very high-dimensional model. And what we want to do is, we want to recover the dynamical system just based on the spike train. So we took 150 subsample neurons, only excitatory in this case, and gave a bunch of trials and fit our model. This is the trajectories that we got for single trials. The red is the starting point. It converges to either one of these two choices, depending on which population won. But what's more important is what dynamic system it learned. Right? So these two are actually boring. If you look at the level at 4 LDSs, you can see that there's a flow that's going this way. Right? That's that push over here. There's a saddle point here that splits your trajectories into two, that converges to either this stable fixed point, so some spiral here, or that stable fixed point. And if you compare this to the theoretically reduced model, so judging Wang's later work, they have reduced the 2,000-dimensional spiking neural net using mean field theory and timescale reduction into a 2-dimensional model that they could really understand. This was a more interpretable version of that model, which was actually this guy, 2 stable fixed point, 1 saddle with a separatrix in the middle. So we recovered what they did was with all the equations and all the tools. We only did it with just the spike trains that we have observed. We applied this method to V1 driven by drifting gratings, choosing 4 orientations in this case. So there were 4 oriented drifting gratings. These are the raw data that we fit. There were 200 trials of this. These are the latent trajectories that were recovered, and these are the simulated simulations. So if you recover a model and simulate, it does find these two limit cycles, stable limit cycles, which is impossible to get with LDSs. But with piecewise LDS, you can get this. Of course, this is in 3D in this case. The latent dimension was 3D, so I can't really show you the vector fields, which is a problem of many of these approaches. I have 3 minutes. I'm going to quickly tell you about validation. So a lot of the times what you want to do is, once you recover these dynamical systems, you want to give meaning to it by assigning different meaning to different fixed points and different features and different axes in the space, but then you want to test it, right? You don't know if what you recovered is real. And one way to test it is to perturb the system with a feedback control. Right? While the experiment is going on, you want to be able to perturb the system and see if your predictions hold, both in terms of the latent trajectory and also the behavior, hopefully. So we have been developing a set of methods for doing this inference in real time, hopefully in very fast real time. And basically, our methods are based on Bayesian filtering, which means we're going to have streaming data that comes from 1 to t, and then we want to estimate all our parameters, all the latent states and the dynamic systems, using only the data up to that time. Of course, this inference is not tractable for the models class that we consider. Dynamics is very nonlinear. Observation is often Poisson or more complex. And what we want to do is do this inference in constant time with O1 time complexity, such that we can run this in real time. So we have, I'm not going to go through detail here, but we have basically 2 methods. The first one is faster. This runs about 1 to 2 milliseconds per data point. And this one has an approximation of the posterior over the x, the latent state as Gaussian, and we can run this really fast. Just a quick demonstration in simulation. This is a true system, which was a two-dimensional oscillation, and these are the spike trains that were coming out. And this is the prediction. At this point, we're predicting all the spike trains and the latent states using this online method. This online method is also adaptive. So if the environment, if the dynamical system suddenly changes, let's say it was spiraling in counterclockwise, but it's switched suddenly to clockwise, it'll take few samples, but it's capable of tracking these non-stationary changes. But this method is an approximate method, and so we were not super happy, especially because the posterior is confined to be a single mode Gaussian bump. And we wanted to be able to have a more expressive posterior distribution. So we have developed recently this streaming version of the variational Monte Carlo method. Again, I won't have time to go through the details. Basically, we're approximating the posterior distribution, filtering distribution as weighted samples. So we'll have, it's a type of particle filter. We approximate it with a set of points with associated weights, W's, and we're optimizing this cost function, which is a tight bound of the real thing that we want to maximize, which is the marginal log likelihood. So the algorithm is over there. It's for details, read the preprint. It's good. It's better than many things. I will not have time to talk about this. I'll show you an example of the Zhaojing Wang's model again. So this one, we have modified that model so that we have a continuous set of trials. So the system will make decisions, left or right decisions, and then we have introduced a reset signal that will push it down back to the initial state. So we have continuous trials now. We subsampled, again, a small set of neurons, run it for a long time, and it recovers these phase portraits. And if we simulate from, so this phase portrait was the one that I was showing you earlier, slightly different geometry because there's always a transformation, linear transformation that's free. There's a invariance there. So we can stretch this a little bit, but basically you can see the same geometry and topology here, saddle point and two stable points. This is a simulation. Once you fit the model, you can simulate from the model with no input, or with the input that's given as stimulus and the reset, and these are the simulated trials. That does not know anything about the real spiky neural network. All right, so I'm going to show you some videos that's actually working for each sample. This is a 50-dimensional Gaussian observation case. The first sample that the algorithm sees is just the 50 numbers. Right? And every time step it's going to see one more point. And it's never going to see that data again. It's an online algorithm. So what you're going to see here on the left is the true dynamics is simulation. The true state is the blue X. The estimated latent X state, the mean is the green. And on the right side, you'll see the F that the system is estimating as time goes. So this is the time over here. As time goes, there's a neural net that's learning how to transform from the observation space to the current state. And as it's going around, you learn where these states are. One advantage of doing this model is that it also estimates the confidence of the model. So in this case, same video, but I'm showing you here as green where the model is confident. So whenever the state has passed through that region of the state space many times, it will be more confident on that region. Of course, if far away from where you have traveled, you have no idea what's going to happen, so you're never going to have good confidence unless you perturb your system is changing. In this case, I'm slightly cheating because I fixed the observation matrix such that the inference is faster. But it works with an arbitrary observation matrix. It just takes longer to converge. Okay, with one minute left, I'll just skip this. I'll just summarize. So what I'm trying to say is that the state space models of this particular form are very powerful and are very promising. And these are sort of challenges that the field is that needs to address. The expressive power of the dynamical system, how we visualize these systems in 2D, we can easily do it. In higher dimensions, it's very hard. How do we capture this essence of computation and visualize it so that we can interpret it? How do we evaluate this? What's the optimization criteria? Maybe prediction, maybe forecasting is very good. Maybe co-smoothing is also a good idea. How do we assign meaning to this latent space? This depends on different tasks that the system is performing, and the real-time version. And I didn't have time to talk about other important questions, including trainability. Sometimes, even if your system is very expressive, you just need a ton of data, or it doesn't converge very well. Also, there's a difficulty in terms of assessing if your data set has enough signal-to-noise ratio such that you can recover things very confidently. It'd be nice if you can connect to normative theories. It'd be nice if you can connect back to the neuron space and perhaps recover circuits or cell types related to cell types. We need to be able to incorporate prior knowledge about these kind of systems. More knowledge the better. And also we need to be able to flexibly trade off between different scales or complexity of these systems and interpretability. With that, I will thank my lab members and my funding. And just a quick advertisement. We have a new Center for Neural Circuit Dynamics at Stony Brook, and we're hiring experimental and theoretical postdocs. So if you're interested, please contact me. Thank you.